I'd like now to introduce the first speaker, who's somebody who's a very talented storyteller. She's a successful author of children's books, many of which describe the plight of threatened habitats. She's been to a couple of the World Land Trust projects. She's been to Borneo, she's been to India, so she's talked to the partners on the ground. She knows what's going on. I also know her from way back, because we both presented wildlife programmes down at the Natural History Unit in Bristol. And I know that she shares my passion for wildlife and the work of the World Land Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicola Davies.
One of the things that unites World Land Trust supporters is, as Sue said, a passion for the natural world. And I think when we're talking to other grown-ups about our passion for the natural world, we kind of dress it up in all sorts of grown-up ideas like biodiversity and carbon sinks and sustainability. But I suspect for all of us, and where's my little magic wand, our passion for the natural world goes back right to our childhoods. Ooh, that's me. That's me when I was 5. And that's when my passion for the natural world started. And I think for all of us who have that connection with nature, that's when it starts for us. In a moment at the bottom of a garden, or at the top of a hill, or at the edge of the sea, when you feel yourself to be a little tiny person in the big wild outdoors. And it doesn't matter if that big wild outdoors is just the overgrown bomb site at the bottom of the street. It's that early experience of nature that makes that crucial connection, and that starts to make a World Land Trust supporter. Now, when I was growing up, those experiences were common to all childhoods. So those opportunities to bond with the natural world were there for almost everybody. That is not the case for many modern children. This is what many modern children experience. And they don't have the opportunity to make that crucial relationship with nature. Now, if young children don't make that connection with nature in their early years, then in 50 years' time, World Land Trust supporters are going to be pretty thin on the ground. Which is where my strategy comes in as a writer. So part of my job as a writer is to try and make those connections with the natural world and young children stronger. And also to try and encourage parents of the current generation of parents who do have some memory of those early experiences of the natural world. To encourage them to remember those simple pleasures. Things like, you know, that lovely sound that moths make when they fly into your bedroom at night and they go and they hit the lampshade, and how magical that is. Simple things like collecting shells on a beach, or that wonderful moment when the tide comes in and washes away your sandcastle. Or finding spider silk spread over a lawn. I remember my first day at school in my green school uniform, on a September morning, seeing spider silk spread all over the lawn. So I want to encourage children to have those experiences, and to encourage parents to remember how powerful those experiences were, and then to seek them out for their children. But there's another thing that binds all World Land Trust supporters together that Sue's already mentioned. World Land Trust supporters believe that we have power to protect what remains of the natural world. That we have power through taking action to protect the natural world from the tsunami of threats that are currently facing. And that's where my other strategy as a children's writer comes in. To put over the message that the battle for the natural world is by no means lost, and that organisations and individuals can take action to save it, bit by bit, tree by tree, plot by plot. And so last year I wrote a series of 4 books, each of which is about a positive conservation story. In this case, It was the World Land Trust's project in the Garo Hills in northern India, establishing elephant corridors in partnership with Wildlife Trusts of India and local people to give elephants safe passage through forest areas between two big forest reserves. So I told this real conservational story, but through the medium of a fictional story, a fictional holder for the real life conservation story. And doing it as a fictional story allowed me to put a child right at the centre of the action so that my readers could really relate to the information that I was presenting them with. And I went to the Garo Hills with World Land Trusts and Wildlife Trust of India. And the reason that this project has been so successful is that the local people, the Garo, have a very, very strong sense of community and an enormously strong connection, both economic, practical, but cultural connection to their forest. And they recognised, before it was too late, how important their forest was to them. Now, I could have researched the facts about this story without moving from my desk, picking up the phone and nattering to Viv and John and reading scientific papers and all that kind of stuff. But what I couldn't get without actually going to the place was the cultural, the economic, the emotional roots of this story, the emotional roots that are going to hopefully wiggle their way down into the hearts of my readers, and with their emotional connection with this story, they will also absorb the information. So I had lots and lots of conversations with the people on the ground in the Garo Hills, with the Garo people who had decided they wanted to make the effort to save their forest, to find other ways of making a living that didn't depend on denuding the hills of its beautiful forest. And those conversations with people like this is the Nokma of the village that I worked with, absolutely lovely person. And this old gentleman, who was very, very proud of his forest, extremely proud of his family, became the model for the grandfather character in my book. And all those conversations, talking to these little kids, 5 minutes before this, they were running around at the tops of their voices. And then as soon as I got my camera out, they were very, very serious. So these children were the direct models, the drawings from life, if you like, that I then put into my story. And the little boy, Willen's story, who's on the left, and this is his brother, Relip. The opening scene of my story came absolutely directly from something that one of the Garo foresters told me. He told me that when he was a little boy in his village, when the elephants used to pass on their elephant road, on the passage between the two big forest reserves, they would sometimes come into the village and lean against one of those houses that I showed you in the photograph there. So they're very beautiful, quite solid houses, but not as solid as a brick house. And obviously an elephant leaning against a house like that is going to shift it. And this chap told me that the elephants leaned to get the house, not moving it an awful lot, just a little bit. And he said it was as if they were showing us who really owned the forest. And that I thought was totally wonderful. I'm just going to read you a tiny little bit of this, just to give you a flavour of what I've been doing, trying to put the World Land Trust message into a format that communicates with 10-year-olds. These two little boys have been woken up, Willen and Relip have been woken up by something that's outside their house. Something very, very big was pushing at the corner of the sleeping hut. It made a low rumbling that Willen felt in his chest rather than heard through his ears, and its deep breaths puffed through the gap in the walls. It shuffled its feet with a sound like someone moving huge sacks of rice over a dusty floor, and pushed the hut further over. The bamboo framework creaked and groaned, and the boys were rolled around like beans in a box. For a moment, their hut was held, as if the elephant was contemplating overturning it completely. But as quickly and easily as it had been picked up, it was dropped with a judder. Outside there was a little more rumbling and shuffling, one long last sigh and then silence. The boys held their breath. Insects and frogs chirred and plinked in the dark forest. The night had returned to normal. Now, one of the things that this fictional device allows me to do is to present some of the arguments around any complicated conservational problem by setting up arguments between the characters in my book, which also gives it a cultural context, and it just generally makes it a much more jolly to read than a 500-page technical report. And what actually happens in this book is that little Willen here, who has various problems in his life, becomes the catalyst for change in the village. He becomes the advocate for the forest and crucially turns the opinion of the village towards keeping their forest when there was some question of whether they would cut down their forest and have a coal mine and grow cash crops instead. So I'm just going to read you the little bit at the end where Willen is standing up on a chair, very nervous in front of a whole crowd of people, rather like me now, very nervous in front of a whole crowd of people. And he's been to his grandfather's village where all the trees were cut down. And one of the things I did when I was with the World Land Trust in northeast India was I visited an area which had completely lost its forest. And the communities there were impoverished and deserted and depressed, whereas the communities in the Garo Hills, where they've decided to keep their forest, are absolutely vibrant and not old-fashioned. There are young people there who have mobile phones on solar chargers, who are kind of really plugged into the modern world, but have learned how to keep this balance. And they have learnt soon enough that the value of their forest and how to hang on to it. So anyway, this is little Willen talking to his village. I went to Grandpa's village, he said, as loudly as he could. And everyone had left except one old lady who lived alone with no one to make her fire or cook her dinner. She was the loneliest person I've ever seen. It had gone very quiet. Willen went on. She showed us a tree. One tree. Just one tree. It was the last tree left of all the forest that had once covered those hills. Like our forest covers our hills. In my grandfather's village, they cut the trees to grow crops and mine coal. And no one lives in that village now. No one except that one lonely, lonely old woman. Willen looked round at all the faces, at all the eyes fixed on him, and he told them, if we cut down our forest, we'll lose our elephants, our gibbons, our homes, our food, our rain, and worst of all, we'll lose each other. And that was really the message that was given to me by the Garo people in the Garo Hills. I really didn't need to make very much up. It was a patchwork job, really, rather than a job of complete construction. So that book is now out in this country. It will be coming out in America, it's coming out in Italy. It has a big plug for the World Land Trust at the back. Of course, all my PLR goes to the World Land Trust. But I'm hoping that that's going to raise new supporters for the future. And I just quickly want to mention, there's Willen standing on his stool, another book. Some of you will have seen this before at another World Land Trust gathering. This is a picture book that's coming out in the autumn, and it's a picture book about transformation, about the transformation of landscapes through tree planting, about the transformation of human hearts and the possibility for change. So it has a message that I hope will speak to children and also to grown-ups, and I want it to work very hard for the World Land Trust. So I'm setting up a website linked to tree planting, linked to this story, where people will be able to donate directly to the World Land Trust and see forests growing up and being preserved in connection with a story that is all about forests and how trees can transform landscapes and transform human lives. Now I know that for some of us who get into arguments about conservation and why it's important and why the natural world is important, it can sometimes feel that you've got a tangled piece of knitting that you're going to try and find the end of. But actually, the message is dead simple. Human beings need nature. We need nature to be the biggest thing there is. And although as an organisation, as individuals, we are very small, I'm going to quote you something now that I read every day of my childhood because it was on the wall of the downstairs loo in a little frame. And I'm sure, and some people have heard me say this before, but it carries a message for organisations like us and for our individual desires to see the natural world preserved for future generations. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make the mighty ocean and the promised land. Now, we are all little grains of sand and little drops of water, but together we can do something very big, grain by grain, drop by drop, tree by tree.